when an anonymous warning threatens my son. Can I outsmart the cunning Chad Morrison before it's too late? It was a misty morning in Manhattan when I discovered our trusted broker, Chad Morrison, had vanished without a trace, just days before closing on the condo of our dreams. The air was thick with fog, swirling around my ankles as I stood on the sidewalk outside his empty office on West 44th. We had poured our life savings into this venture, every cent of our massive down payment held securely in his hands at least. That's what we thought. With a heart pounding like a drum, I glanced at the phone in my hand, only to find it disconnected, his emails going straight to spam, and my hopes rapidly sinking. Panic set in as I scoured through my inbox, frantically searching for clues, for any sign of life, when a chilling thought struck me. What if we weren't just unlucky but part of a larger scheme? Chad Morrison was a well-known name in the industry, his slicked back hair and tailored suits peddling a charm that could easily lull anyone into a false sense of security. We had met him at an open house where he waxed poetic about the wonders of urban living, the soaring ceilings of our potential new home, and the lucrative investment we were making. His silver tongue had convinced us we were making the right call, that this was our chance to sink into the vibrant heart of Manhattan. Little did we know that behind that charming facade lay a man willing to risk our dreams for his own gains. The real nightmare began when I reached out to other clients on an online forum, desperately looking for answers through the blurry lines of a city shrouded in fog. As I typed, my belly twisted with dread. Each click, each ping on my laptop felt like grasping at shadows. It didn't take long before another name popped up, a woman named Emily. She expressed her anger at a similar situation, having lost her deposit just a month earlier. I typed furiously, disheartened but finding solace in knowing I wasn't alone in my panic. Among the frantic exchanges, I discovered deeper threads connecting us. Others had shared their startling encounters, painting a picture that made my skin crawl. Forged documents, faked real estate licenses, and a trail of unwitting victims left in Chad's wake. Connection after connection swirled, leading us to a single conclusion. He hadn't just vanished. He had orchestrated an elaborate scheme that turned the excitement of homeownership into a horror story, robbing us of our hard-earned savings while feeding off our aspirations. I could hardly wrap my mind around the idea that the promise of my downtown sanctuary, the kitchen, I'd planned to fill with laughter, the tiny balcony that beckoned evenings spent sipping wine, was slipping away, swallowed whole by a man whose betrayal I had so naively overlooked. The morning fog felt heavier, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud as I continued to dig deeper. Days melded into an agonizing haze of phone calls and frantic emails, my life reduced to a series of escalating contests with automated services and swindled connections. Each time I dialed, a bead of sweat trickled down my spine. I could hear the confidence of our dreams whispering away in the echoes of cheap hold music. Every delay, every forced smile at the real estate office felt like the insult of a fresh wound. I stopped at nothing, clawing for the threads of hope that our deposit might still be recovered. As dusk settled over the city, my mind raced with thoughts of revenge. I prayed the police would see the dark web of lies and deceit that surrounded Morrison, but each interaction left me feeling more powerless than the last. They thrived on real cases, evidence, and leadstone of which I had. To them, my heartbreak was merely a bullet point in a report. Each time I pressed for more action, I felt the gaze of indifference like ice on my skin. In my most desperate hour, I resolved to take matters into my own hands. This wasn't just about recovering money. It was about justice, about making Chad Morrison pay for the lives he disrupted. I would dig further, uncover the network behind him, and expose a world that felt so meticulously hidden. The city was vast, but I was determined to navigate its darkest corners. I clenched my fists, resolution flooding my veins. Could I bring him to justice before he disappeared for good? Or would he continue to haunt the streets of Manhattan, living off the dreams of the innocent? I didn't know then, but I felt a storm brewing. Tomorrow, I would find Emily, and together we would turn our despair into something lethal. After all, if I was going to go down this rabbit hole, there was no longer any turning back. The city hummed with its usual rush as evening set in, the dim glow of neon lights flickering through raindrops that clung to the window pane like desperate memories. It felt as if Manhattan had turned its back on me, wrapping itself in a veil of vibrant energy while I stood paralyzed, weighed down by anger and betrayal. How could Chad Morrison, the broker who had sold us a dream, turn out to be my worst nightmare? With darkness falling around me, I plunged into a world of online forums, Facebook groups, and whispered confessions in coffee shops, determined to uncover the truth. In my desperation, I found Jennifer, a mother of two, who had invested her life savings into a cozy condo on the Upper East Side, only to discover that with every moment that ticked by, Her hopes evaporated like smoke into the New York night. We met at a local cafe, tucked away from the busy streets, where the aroma of fresh pastries mingled with the scent of frustration. As she poured her heart out over steaming mugs, I recognized the flicker of disbelief in her eyes, the way her fingers absently twisted the delicate napkin. She, too, had been lured by Chad's charm, entranced by his charismatic reassurances, and now she was staring at the gaping hole in her finances as we shared our anguish. Together, we started to piece together the fragmented battles we were waging, each of us grappling with the emotional scars left by Chad's treachery. Jennifer revealed that she had met several other vulnerable victims, a small army of shattered dreams united by their pursuit of justice. Our shared experiences became a tangled web of questions and rage directed at a single man who had wielded his influence like a weapon, effortlessly manipulating the system while we floundered in the chaotic wake of his actions. With newfound camaraderie, we formed a plan to seek out others who had lost everything and trap Chad in a corner of their combined testimonies. One rainy afternoon, as our group gathered in a dimly lit living room overlooking the bustling street below, the sense of urgency heightened. We traded stories about Chad's dubious tactics, blurring the lines of legality with forged documents and faked licenses, all while leaving the aftermath of our shattered dreams in his wake. A friend of Jennifer's even pulled out a crumpled copy of a flyer that Chad had distributed at an open house of flyer, boasting his extensive experience and unparalleled track record. The words now dripped with irony and deceit. Every boast seemed like a cruel taunt, a reminder of how easily we had been ensnared in his trap. As I jotted down notes, fueled by the unprecedented urgency of our actions, a chill swept through the room. Had Chad Morrison's traps ensnared others, like a silent web ensnaring unsuspecting flies? Scrolling through the shared online posts later that night, I could feel the threads of despair running deeper as each story resonated painfully with our own. I could almost hear the echoes of heartache punctuated by the sharp sound of pen against paper, while desperately sketching out the connections we'd unearthed unifying us against this hidden monster that lurked in our city. But then, just as the adrenaline began to offer hope, I received an email that shattered the fragile peace we had started to build. The sender was anonymous, presenting themselves as someone in the know, someone who had been following our progress. Their terse message warned us to stop digging into Chad's affairs, claiming ominously that we'd regret it if we continued. A shiver coursed through my spine as I read those words repeatedly, making them resonate like a heartbeat echoing in the void. Who could it be? A warning from a protective ally, or a chilling threat from Chad's followers? The blend of fear and determination battled in my gut, each digestive twist surging in tight balls of anxiety. Our momentum felt like a dam about to burst, and yet the dark undercurrents threatened to drag us down with it. I shared the email with Jennifer, and we exchanged worried glances that spoke louder than words ever could. Who knew what kind of web Chad had spun around himself? He had recruited others to carry out his shady dealings, and there was no telling how far his connections might reach. Anxiety pinched at our resolve. We were stepping into something far bigger than just a personal vendetta against one deceitful broker. Our case was transforming into a fight against a larger, more insidious power, encased in the glitz of the Manhattan property market. Fueled by fear but driven by a need for retribution, our resolve hardening like steel, we dug deeper. I scoured public records, while Jennifer called in favors from family friends in the legal field. We began gathering every scrap of evidence and testimony, piecing together a puzzle that, in our minds, would yield the perfect trap for Chad. Yet, each passing day brought new revelations accompanied by mounting threats. We could feel the shadows lengthening behind us, and the battle lines drawn between our desires for justice and the lengths one would go to protect their empire. Even as the world around us buzzed with lifelights twinkling in sync with our rising panic, I refused to back down. Chad Morrison may have been a ghost now, slipping through our fingers like so much vapor, but we would not relent. With every story, every piece of evidence, we stitched together hope, readying ourselves to take on whatever darkness lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring another chance to confront the unknown, and as I closed my laptop, the glow of the screen reflected a new determination. We were no longer alone in our fight. We had become a resistance, a hurricane ready to unleash its fury on the man who had stolen our future. I sensed that if we pressed on, the truth would eventually emerge from the depths. After all, there was power in unity, and together, we would expose Chad Morrison for the monster he truly was. The late afternoon sun draped Manhattan in a warm, golden hue, yet I felt an icy knot of dread tightening within me. As I stood across the cafe table from Jennifer and a handful of other victims, the vibrancy of the city felt like a cruel joke against our collective despair. Each of us had pinned our dreams on the crumbling promise of Chad Morrison, and now, with each passing day, those dreams felt further away. Fearing for my safety and the safety of my loved ones, I pooled my resources with Jennifer, whose eyes mirrored the anguish etched on my face, and half a dozen others who had also been deceived by our once beloved broker, Chad. After much discussion, we reached a collective decision to hire a private investigator, Ray, a seasoned expert specialized in real estate fraud. Our first meeting was in one of those dimly lit cafes where the sound of clinking cups drowned out the bustle of the city outside. Over lattes gone cold, Ray methodically laid out the intricate web of lies that Chad wove with such ease. "We are looking at a multifaceted scam," he asserted, voice low yet steady. The room felt heavy with expectation, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I glimpsed a glimmer of hope. Together, we exchanged chilling stories of our interactions with Chad, revealing the various layers of his deceit. As Jennifer recounted how he had lured her with tales of extraordinary deals that later morphed into phantom properties, the tension in the air thickened. Chad had wielded charisma like a weapon, effortlessly ensnaring families, hoping for a better life in his slick, deceitful charisma. Each shared horror story became a brick in the wall that we were slowly constructing around him, forming a united front against this man who thought he could disappear into the shadows. One particularly dreary afternoon, as the rain drummed endlessly against the cafe's roof, we worked to assemble evidence. I was struck by the similarity how Chad's tactics mirrored textbook examples of fraud. From forged documents to fictitious testimonials, the same tactics kept rising to the surface like ghosts from a forgotten past. It was both unsettling and empowering to see our individual experiences come together. We could harness this collective wisdom to corner him, I thought, perhaps even lay bare his dark secrets for the world to see. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows around the cafe, I felt a flicker of determination ignite within our group. We vowed to stand strong and pool our resources, forming bonds forged in the agony of betrayal. We weren't just victims anymore. We were warriors fighting for our lost futures. Yet as optimism filled the room, dark tendrils of anxiety wove their way through my thoughts, reminding me of the dangers lurking around each corner. Would Chad retaliate? Did he have connections that could make our endeavor perilous? Just when I thought we could seize control of our fate, my phone vibrated with an incoming message from an unknown number, and within moments, I felt as if the ground had been yanked from beneath my feet. A single photo loaded onto the screen, capturing my son playing outside our current apartment, innocent and unaware. My heart dropped. He was a beautiful dot of light against the darkness that Chad represented. Accompanying the photo was a cryptic phrase that sent chills racing down my spine. "Watch your back." My breath caught in my throat, and a wave of nausea crashed over me. How could I protect my son and hold Chad accountable at the same time? Fear clawed at the edges of my resolve, blackening the hopes we had begun to build with each meeting. Jennifer leaned in, concern etching her features deeper than any line of worry could. "What was that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as I showed her the message. "This is getting dangerous. If Chad is watching us, we must tread carefully, and we can't let him intimidate us. Our families are at stake." The tension in the air blossomed into a heady sense of urgency, igniting the fire of our mission with the painful reminder of what was at risk. As the evening settled around us, an air of uncertainty hung overhead, thickening the atmosphere in our little gathering. We needed to act, and soon. My mind raced, contemplating what moves we could make without tipping off Chad. Would litigation help? Could it scare him into resurfacing, or would it only invite more danger into our lives? With each step towards justice, it felt as if the shadows loomed larger, ready to swallow us whole. But even drenched in fear, I felt the embers of resolve ignite anew deep within me. We were a coalition, emboldened by our shared pain, ready to confront Chad Morrison not just for ourselves, but for every family he had deceived. The real estate market might have been his playground, but we would refuse to let it remain his kingdom. Finally, I glanced at each determined face surrounding me. We had begun this journey as strangers, but now a profound bond tied our fates together. Tomorrow promised fresh challenges, and we would not shy away from them. The truth would shine through, no matter how dark the path appeared. As I left the cafe, a sense of unity settled in my chest, along with a heavy foreboding about the storm brewing ahead, ready to unleash its fury with the next move we made. Our quest for justice was just beginning, and I could feel it, the tension, the stakes, escalating with every heartbeat. What lay ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. We would not back down. The city lights glimmered hue behind the window, wrapping the incessant ticking of the clock in a suffocating blanket of silence. Fueled by anger and an unyielding urge for justice, I found myself hunched over my laptop late that night, scrolling anxiously through a barrage of documents Ray had painstakingly collected for our case against Chad Morrison. We had ramped up our surveillance efforts in the hope of catching him in the act. Yet I felt a cold wave of foreboding wash over me as I reached for the camera equipment tucked away for our operation. It wasn't there. My fingers trembled as I rummaged through drawers, searching for the gear that now felt like an extension of my resolve. Panic erupted in my chest when I discovered that everything had been compromised. The camera was missing, and the realization sunk in like a lead ball in my stomach. It felt like a warning showed us stark reminder of how deeply Chad's reach extended, how closely he was monitoring us, and how dangerous our endeavor had become. Defiance bubbled inside me, mixing with the rising tide of fear. We can't back down now. We have to organize the press conference, share our truths, and go public. I told Jennifer, who sat next to me, her dark eyes reflecting a fierce determination of their own. Several others in our group echoed that sentiment, drawing strength from each other's shared misery. Together, we would expose Chad Morrison, and if the godfather of deceit thought he could scare us away, he had another thing coming. The next evening, as dusk engulfed the city, I stood nervously behind the podium alongside Jennifer. The weight of our mission pressed heavily upon my shoulders while a small crowd of fellow victims and reporters assembled, radiating a mixture of dread and hope. My mind raced with the stories we had rehearsed so many times, each beating heart behind me a reminder of why we were here. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, excitement and terror intertwined like a double helix spiraling out of control. This was our chance to shine a light on Chad's darkness. But just as the cameras started rolling, the air shifted ominously. A mob of Chad's alleged new associates stormed in, voices raised and filled with venom. They denounced us as liars, spinning a web of excuses over our heads, dismissing us as mere threats to their precious industry. My heart raced as I clutched the podium tighter. Terror coursed through my veins, a wild horse running untamed. I stammered through my words, pleading with the press to understand the depths of our plight. The stage felt like quicksand, capable of swallowing me whole at any moment. I locked eyes with Jennifer, grounding myself in her unwavering gaze. But even that provided little solace against the cacophony protesting our truth. "You're bitter because you can't thrive in this market," one of Chad's associates shouted, and I wanted to retaliate, to reveal our fractured lives in all their rawness. Yet there was something else swirling within mean, insatiable hunger to expose the atrocities behind Chad's polished exterior. I could feel the tide turning as witnesses began to peek through the chaos, their faces etched with empathy. As we spoke of lies, forgeries, and families torn apart, something inexplicable stirred within me, a resilience, ignited in the darkest moments of intent. Each word I uttered unveiled the painful truths we had lived through, pouring out the weight of sorrow into an ocean of shared prejudice, against a man who orchestrated our suffering. It was a visceral awakening, like pouring gasoline on embers, watching as flames of justice began to lick at the edges of corruption. But as the fray escalated, my pulse quickened. We were on the brink of something monumental, yet dread coiled around my heart, unwilling to let go. Would we succeed in our bid for justice, or would Chad drag us back into the shadows? This was our defining moment, but just like a twisted script, nothing ever went according to plan. I felt the camera lenses encircling us, hungry for a narrative or destinies intertwined, as the storm of chaos unfurled around us. The odds were stacked against us, and yet I knew that this was just the beginning. Our fight for truth was grounded not only in our suffering, but steeped in a rotten core of injustice that had lodged itself at the heart of New York's real estate game. Our stakes in this battle were more than just money or property. They were rooted in the very essence of trust itself, something that Chad Morrison had stripped away with little more than a malicious smile. I didn't realize then that deep within this unfolding chaos, an even more menacing storm was gathering on the horizon. Just as we began to break the surface of truth, I would uncover a bombshell that would send shockwaves through our fragile alliance. How could one man continue to play God in a city that chewed up and spat out the brave? The truth we sought felt more than a fleeting dream. It was on the cusp of becoming a conquest, one that would draw lines through the ink of corruption still stained by Chad's hands. The night wrapped around us like a dark shroud, every flicker of streetlight outside our window casting daunting shadows in our dim apartment. Jennifer's face, usually so full of resolve, was now etched with a profound dread that I couldn't shake from my mind. Just moments ago, we had been gathered in the living room, discussing our next steps against Chad Morrison, the broker who had vanished with our life savings. But now, as she pulled me aside, her voice trembled with the weight of her revelation. There was something crucial she had been holding back, a bombshell that threatened to unravel everything we thought we knew. "I saw him, Alex," she whispered urgently, her wide eyes scanning the corners of the room as if expecting the walls might have ears. Chad was lurking nearby, watching us closely. I felt his gaze, and it made my skin crawl. My heart sank. The thought of that despicable man playing puppet master with our lives twisted a knot in my stomach. We thought we were gathering strength, plotting our next moves against him. Instead, we became reckless participants in a treacherous game of cat and mouse. "But it gets worse," she continued, her voice barely above a breath. The air felt suffocating as dread coiled around us. "He sent that window company to our building to tenderize our safety, to put it lightly." I struggled to comprehend her words. Tenderize our safety? What did that even mean? A sickening realization stirred within me. We weren't just battling for our stolen deposits. This conflict had escalated into something sinister and terrifying. Our safety, our very lives, were now at stake. As we confirmed the gravity of our situation, all the emotion I had buried began to resurface, breathing life into a cold fear. "What if he does something to hurt us, Jen?" I blurted out, my breath hitching in my throat. Jennifer's gaze faltered, and I saw the fear mirrored in her expression. Our families, our futures, they relied on us to expose Chad and his scheme. It was no longer just a battle for money. It was a fight for our existence, our right to live safely in a city filled with strangers, promises, and threats. "We can't let him intimidate us into silence," I declared, striving for conviction in my voice. In that moment, our fear transformed into defiance, igniting a flicker of determination that spread like wildfire through us. We knew a confrontation was inevitable. We had waited too long, suffered too deeply. So, under the shroud of night, we would lie in wait, ready to face Chad Morrison head-on, armed with nothing but our courage and the knowledge that we had each other. The hours crept by like molasses, every tick of the clock amplifying our anxiety. Dim light poured in from the street, illuminating the cramped corners of our small apartment as we settled in, devising our plan. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual nightlife, a stark contrast to the stillness that threatened to consume us. With our hearts pounding, we gathered every piece of evidence we could muster, hoping to expose the deceit that had ensnared us. This was no longer just a battle for justice. It was a preparation for confrontation, our thoughts swirling around possible scenarios of how this night might unfold. As we adjusted our grips on the few tools we had, a small flashlight, a voice recorder, and our own voice filled with righteous anger, we settled behind the curtains, peering out with bated breath. Every rustle, every murmur outside heightened our senses, turning the normal sounds of Manhattan into ominous harbingers of dread. Was that him? Was he coming for us again? Anxiety coiled like a snake around my spine, leaving me teetering on the edge of desperation and determination. Then the moon broke free from the clouds, casting an eerie glow across the street below, illuminating the very ground where Chad had once paced, like a wolf stalking his prey. My blood ran cold as I pictured him conjuring new plans in that twisted mind of his. What depths would he sink to now? Suddenly, all of my fears crystallized into a singular thought. We could no longer allow this man to control our destinies. Tonight, we would seize our power, or we would suffer trying. Just as we braced ourselves for the confrontation, memories of the hell we had endured flooded my mind. How much longer could we live like this, constantly looking over our shoulders? I turned to Jennifer, desperation wrinkling my brows. "We're not just fighting for justice anymore, Jen. We're fighting for our lives," I reminded her, my heart racing with every staring moment. Silence enveloped us, but it was the kind of silence that beckoned for something explosive, a confrontation that would shatter this nightmare into oblivion. Our eyes locked, and at that moment we understood. The stakes had never been higher. Tomorrow we would emerge from the dark, and if fate had any mercy, we would expose the lion in its den. As I steeled myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation would shake the foundations of Chad's empire, even if we had to pay for it with everything we had. The early evening light clung dimly to the concrete jungle of Manhattan, casting long shadows over the grimy streets. As I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on my chest, it was the crucial moment when our confrontation with Chad Morrison was supposed to unfold. Jennifer and I had been driven by desperation and rage to track down the very broker who had pocketed our life savings and vanished without a trace. However, as we approached the location Ray had suggested, an abandoned warehouse in the Bowery area, our hearts sank simultaneously. Chad slipped away from us yet again, our plans unraveling like a cheap sweater pulled at the seams. Despite the crushing disappointment, Ray's voice broke through my despair. "I managed to trace some of his financial movements," he had informed us, with determination sparking in his eyes. I could feel a flicker of hope igniting within me, our sharp plan to expose him now evolving into something potentially monumental. Yet, that hope was quickly dampened by the weight of the information Ray revealed. We had thought our plight was about a simple con, but this was much larger. Chad was siphoning funds from multiple victims, amassing a fortune that dwarfed our own losses. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the shadows around us felt ominous, as if the city itself was conspiring against us. The deeper we dug, the more entangled we became in a vast web of deceit. Chad was not working alone. He had connections to powerful figures within the real estate sector, some of whom wore shiny suits while manipulating the market from behind stacks of paperwork. This was not just a brokerage scheme. It was a multi-million-dollar operation, with roots reaching into the darkest corners of the industry. I couldn't shake the sense of boiling anger coupled with helplessness as I realized we were mere pawns in this twisted game. "What do we do now?" I asked, a tremor of fear slipping into my voice. The uncertainty of our path only heightened the stakes. We had prepared for a showdown, expecting to confront the man who had deceived us, but now we were faced with a proverbial spider's nest, and every thread seemed to point back to Chad. Jennifer was unusually quiet, her face pale as she processed the new reality of our situation. We had underestimated just how deep this corruption permeated. Through clenched teeth, Ray meticulously outlined our next steps, suggesting we gather evidence of Chad's rampant fraud for a case that could open the floodgates to justice. As he talked, I could practically hear the gears shifting in my mind. It was like a puzzle coming together piece by piece, even as it felt overwhelming. Every survivor's story we had collected would help build our case. I felt powerless, but the thought of revealing Chad's illicit actions to the world injected a sense of urgency into my bloodstream. The excitement of our renewed purpose flickered through the discomfort of what we had learned, lighting a fire in me. But underneath that flicker, a chasm of anxiety stretched wide. Chad was still out there, lurking in the shadows while we prepared to draft our plan. And with each passing moment, our window of opportunity was closing. I worried for Jennifer, for my family, for everyone who had unwittingly trusted him, and I knew we were putting them all at risk by pursuing this fight. As we pieced together a dossier filled with evidence bank statements, the testimonies of fellow victims, and records of his questionable affiliations, I felt a growing sense of clarity. It wasn't just our battle anymore. It was a war against a systemic parasite sucking the lifeblood of hard-working families like ours. Our lives had become intertwined with this web of deceit that begged to be unraveled, and in that moment, I realized our fight was more than about our stolen deposit. It was about exposing a broader conspiracy that had thrived in darkness. Just when we felt ready to present our evidence to the world, a chilling thought washed over me. What if Chad was aware of our investigation? What if he had always been a step ahead? A shiver cascaded down my spine, and I turned to Ray and Jennifer. We need to be cautious. If he's worked with someone powerful, they might be watching us right now. The very thought threatened to shatter the adrenaline-fueled momentum we had gained, plummeting me into despair once again. Yet despite the dread clawing at my insides, we pressed forward. The hope that danced on the edges of our minds urged us to take the leap into the unknown. Every moment we had spent in fear and uncertainty only fueled our determination to hold Chad and his accomplices accountable for the havoc they had wreaked upon so many lives. We organized strategically and planned to unveil our findings to law enforcement, convinced that we were building toward a tidal wave of accountability. As the clock inched towards midnight, the city pulsed with an unforgiving life. If there was any time for us to fight back against the shadows, it was now. Together, we would shine a light on the corruption festering beneath the glossy surface of Manhattan real estate. With a final breath, we exchanged a fierce look, filled with unyielding resolve, knowing that tomorrow was the day we would begin dismantling Chad Morrison's empire of terror. But just as dawn broke on that seemingly ordinary day, we realized we hadn't seen the last of Chad. The roller coaster of deception and betrayal continued twisting, and what came next would shake the foundations of this battle yet again. The revelation that awaited us was bound to change everything. The early morning sun streamed through the glass windows of the courtroom, illuminating the tense faces of the spectators as I stood at the front. My heart raced relentlessly in my chest, and each heartbeat resonated like a drum, urging me to fulfill my mission to finally expose Chad Morrison and hold him accountable for the chaos he had wrought in our lives. The air was thick with anticipation, a charged energy that seemed to electrify even the dust particles swirling in the sunlight. Today was not just about me or Jennifer. It was about the hundreds who had been misled by Chad into believing in the promise of home ownership in the vibrant heart of Manhattan. As I glanced at the jury, their expressions betraying curiosity and disbelief, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. Ray's meticulous evidence laid before them a documentary testament to the elaborate web of deception spun by Chad, who had once presented himself as the friendly neighborhood broker. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts while keeping the bubbling resentment at bay. The courtroom had transformed into a battleground, and I was ready to share the sordid truth of how we had been defrauded under the guise of trust. Chad Morrison wasn't just a con artist. He was a master manipulator, I declared, my voice steady yet charged with emotion. He pocketed our life savings, leaving us shattered and vulnerable. But to understand Chad, we need to dig deeper into who he really is and the network that has protected his lies. I made eye contact with the jurors, scanning their faces for any flicker of empathy, any sign that they felt the weight of the betrayal that had befallen us all. The case had been meticulously crafted, each piece of evidence pointing toward how he had forged documents and faked real estate licenses to craft the perfect cover for his malicious intentions, and I felt empowered as I unveiled it all. As I spoke, I detailed how our desperation had brought us together with other victims, weaving a tapestry of despair that connected us to a darker truth. Whispers rippled through the gallery as I laid bare the shocking discovery that Chad had connections with powerful banking officialsmen whom he had portrayed as trustworthy supporters in the industry, including a bigwig with connections that reached far beyond the casual acquaintance. Just as I recalled the disbelief swirling in my mind when I first learned of it, a collective gasp echoed through the room, underscoring the gravity of the conspiracy that lay before us. The reality sank in. This was not merely a personal crime. It was an exploitation of the very fabric of trust that the real estate market relied upon. Chad had sat in those very seats, projecting an image of affability that had disarmed us all, while simultaneously wagging his finger at any reckoning. I ran my hand along the polished wooden table before me, imagining it to be a metaphorical barrier protecting the truth. He reveled in our naivety, taking advantage of our dreams to build a life in the city that never sleeps. I shouted, drawing the courtroom's full attention. My voice echoed, my passion electrifying the air around us, while injecting the public into our intimate pain of pain that stemmed not just from financial loss, but from the immense betrayal we faced. Just as I caught my breath, Chad's lawyer sprang into action, attempting to diminish my revelations, suggesting that we were misinformed and even questioning the validity of our emotionally charged testimonies. His urgency, however, only emphasized the danger that Chad posed not just to us, but to the entire community. I could practically sense Chad's desperation in that moment as he shifted restlessly in his chair, cornered by the truth that was spilling forth uncontrollably. His aloof confidence had been replaced by a palpable fear, a cornered animal realizing that his facade was crumbling into the dust of his deceit. Once more, I took a deep breath to steady myself, pouring every ounce of indignation and outrage into my last statement. This man took everything from us, but he spurred a movement toward accountability. We refuse to remain silent, while others are subjected to his scam. The words barely left my lips before the judge's gavel struck with a resounding crack, silencing the courtroom as he announced he would review the evidence and deliver his ruling shortly. The weight of the moment settled over us, and in that pause, I felt the collective anticipation of a united front, victims and supporters, all standing together in solidarity against the injustice perpetrated by Chad Morrison. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the judge's words, reverberating like a distant thunder. The finality of the verdict hung heavily in the air as we awaited justice that seemed long overdue. Chad, a once suave deceiver with his carefully curated image, was now unrecognizable, being stripped of the mask he had worn for so long. And as the judge turned his gaze toward the jury, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was not just the end of Chad's reign of terror, but the beginning of restoring faith in our community that had been marred by exploitation. When the gavel struck again after a lengthy deliberation, the verdict was clear: guilty. My heart leapt as the weight of the truth was finally recognized and proclaimed before all. Chad Morrison was facing a criminal conviction for fraud and theft, forced to reckon not just with the law, but also with the community he had betrayed. A wave of relief enveloped me, washing away the months of anguish and fear we had endured. I realized then that we could reclaim our narrative. Manhattan could still be a city of dreams, free of deception and darkness. This moment marked not only a personal victory, but a collective step towards rebuilding the trust that Chad had shattered, a victory that would ripple through the community for years to come.